All right, Algebra 1, Lesson 10-5. It's a good one. Completing the square. So if you see there, that is the completing the square formula. That is the formula I'm going to want you to use. I wrote this one to try to make it as simple as it possibly can be so that you have a formula to follow. Rather than what the book wants you to do is do a very first part and then factor it and all that good stuff. I'm going to want you to do a formula-based method. So here's my formula. That is not in the book. So make sure we are getting that down into your notes. Okay? X squared plus 2 times b over 2x plus b over 2 squared equals c plus b over 2 squared. That, yes, it looks like a sideways smiley. It is not. It is implies. Implies that x plus b over 2, that quantity squared, equals c plus b over 2 squared. So, how to put this into play and how to work with it. First step, make sure that your c, okay, and remember, ax squared plus bx plus c. Make sure that c is on the other side. Very, very first step, c on the other side. So we're going to subtract my 32 over. So I would have x squared minus 20x equals a negative 32. Okay, because I subtracted my 32 over. Very first thing I want you to find, if I could put a 1 there instead of a b, that would be great. Very first thing is your b over 2. So what's b here? It's negative 20. Okay, because anything in front of an x is your b. So your b is negative 20. So I'm going to take and put negative 20 over 2. I get negative 10. So my b over 2 is negative 10. From here, you simply plug in to that equation. So we would have x squared plus 2. b over 2, replace it with the b over 2 equals x plus negative 10 squared, because b over 2 is 10, negative 10, equals the c, which was negative 32, because c is negative 32, plus my b over 2 squared, which implies x plus b over 2 squared equals c plus b over 2 squared. From here, we solve. Okay, from here we solve. This right here is just the very first part of the equation. This piece is necessary because this is telling me that I factored it down to that. Even though I'm not having you show all of the steps of the factoring, because I wrote the whole formula for you guys, this key first step is element, because this is the factored part. Okay, so from here we solve. So you're going to have your x minus 10 squared equals negative 32 plus 100. So then I've got x minus 10 squared equals negative 32 plus 100, positive 64. To get rid of a squared, you root it. So we're going to take the square root. So now you got x minus 10 equals square root of 64 plus or minus 8. Okay, so from here, I'm going to draw my little arrow over here. Add 8 over, or not add 8 over, add your 10 over. So now I have x equals that positive 10 out in front of that plus or minus 8. So here's what the plus or minus does. Okay, we're going to take 10 plus 8. We get 18. We're going to take 10 minus 8. We get 2. So my x is going to equal 18 or 2. Okay, 18 or 2. x equals 18 or 2. So let's go over it again. Okay. There's your equation that you're given. Get c by itself on the other side. So subtract your 32 over. Find your b over 2. B is always the number in front of x. So negative 20 over 2, I got negative 10. Plug in. Take this whole equation and very simply just replace that b over 2 in the c parts, which is what I did. From here we solve. Square that negative 10, you get 100. Remember, 2 negatives squared equals a positive. Add them, get 64. Then you take the square root. Whenever you take a square root, you do a plus or minus. So you have x minus 10 equals plus or minus 8. Add your 10 over. Notice I put the 10 out front. 10 plus or minus 8, so it'd be 10 plus 8, or 10 minus 8, 18 or 2. Okay, so there's the basis of completing the square. Don't make it difficult, guys. It's just plugging into a formula. That's all you're doing, is plugging into a formula. Okay, so let's do another one. This one here. Get my c over. Okay, that's going to be my first step. Get my c over. So I'm going to subtract 3. So I've got x squared plus 5x equals a negative 3. Find your b over 2. b over 2, which is 5 over 2. Okay, there's your first step. Now let's do our second step. Let's plug in. X squared plus 2. B over 2 x plus b over 2 squared equals c, which is negative 3, plus b over 2 squared, 5 over 2, which implies that x plus 5 over 2 squared equals a negative 3 plus 5 over 2 squared. From here we solve. So we've got x plus 5 over 2 squared equals negative 3 plus 25 fourths. Remember, you square both the numerator and the denominator on that one. In order for us to add fractions, we have to have common denominator. Okay, so what do I need to multiply this one by? 4 over 4. So I've got x plus 5 over 2 squared equals a negative 12 over 4 plus 25 over 4. What's negative 12 plus 25? 13. So I've got x plus 5 halves squared equals 13 fourths. From here, we're taking the square root. So now I've got x plus 5 halves, because that clears that square, equals root 13 over 2, plus or minus. Here's what I did. I took the square root of 13. I'm going to leave it as the square root of 13. I'm going to leave it as root 13. Then you got to take the square root of 4. Well, what's the square root of 4? 2. So there's no radical sitting down there. Very simple from here. I need to subtract that over because it's positive. So then I have x equals my negative 5 halves, because I subtracted it over, plus or minus root 13 over 2. I am going to leave it like that. Okay, you could put it into decimal. You could do negative 5 plus root 13, then all that divided by 2, negative 5 minus root 13, all that divided by 2. Leave it in the radical form for me. Okay, and like I said, and like I told several people, you know, later on next chapter, we will simplify radicals. Okay, so we're getting to that. But for now, leave it in that radical form. Okay, so this right here, we want to find what c is. Okay, so basically what they want when they ask you that, they want this. All they want is your b over 2 squared. What they want. Okay, that is what they want. They just want your b over 2 squared for that c. So let's find our b over 2. b over 2 is negative 16 over 2 which is negative 8. So now let's take negative 8 and square it. So that means my C is 64. That's it. That's all they want. This is all they want, is just that b over 2, and they're asking you to find C. Okay. So on 19, from your book assignment, on 19, they're going to want you to find what b over 2 is. Again, that's what they want you to find on 19, is just find the b over 2. So one thing about completing the square, if you notice, back on that formula, that x up here was by itself. There was no coefficient in front of that x. So we have to get rid of that coefficient. So we need to divide everything by 2. That's going to be your first step. So let's divide everything by 2. So now I've got k squared plus 2k equals 5. Okay, divided everything by 2. K squared plus 2k equals 5. Find your b over 2. Okay, so b over 2. Well, what's b? It's 2. What's 2 over 2? 1. So what would b over 2 squared be? 1 squared. So it's 1. So my answer to that one is just 1. Okay, that's what my b over 2 would be, is just 1 on that one. So that's all they want on 19 and those problems, that little chunk of problems. They want you to get the variable by itself up front, so divide everything by that number, and then find your b over 2. Okay, so 23. First thing you need to do if you're completing the square on this one, you've got to get rid of that 3 out front. So let's divide everything by 3. So now we've got x squared minus 4x equals 5. Now let's complete the square. First step, your b over 2. So it'd be negative 4 over 2, which is negative 2. Second step, plug in x squared plus 2 b over 2x plus b over 2 squared equals c, which was 5, plus b over 2 squared, which implies x plus b over 2 squared. And notice I'm just putting that minus 2 in there because that's just what my b over 2 is, equals 5 plus b over 2 squared. Let's solve. X minus 2 squared equals 5 plus 4. Well, what's 5 plus 4? 9. X minus 2 squared equals 9. Take the root. X minus 2 equals plus or minus 3. Add your 2 over. So I've got x equals 2 plus or minus 3. Well, what's 2 plus 3? 5. What's 2 minus 3? Negative 1. X equals 5 or negative 1. So there is completing the square. Not difficult, by no means. Does take a little bit more time. But it is something that colleges are using time and time again. It's something that we're going to use in all of our other math classes. Geometry, Algebra 2, Pre-Calc, Calc, so on and so forth. All of those deal with completing the square. And we go into more depth, especially in Algebra 2, as to what it is. So there's completing the square. I know you're going to have lots of questions. You guys know how to get a hold of me. I can do a Zoom lesson if we need to. So just let me know. But there's completing the square in a nutshell. So there you go.